Please be seated. You're really sleepy. I don't see why you came out early. You really did sleep. Well, this night, Mary and Joseph learn what every new parent knows, I think. Every new parent who comes home with a child, right, from the hospital, like everything's good, everything's all right when you're in the hospital, am I right? Like it's all good because like the nurses bring the baby to you, take it away, and right, you get all that, and then you get home. What's the first thing you think? Oh my God, I can't do this, right? I'm not prepared, am I right, mothers? Fathers, you didn't think about it at all, okay, so skip you. Right? Mother, I mean really, weren't you thinking, we are just not prepared? You know, you can read books. There's that great book everybody gets, right? What to expect when you're expecting, yeah? You can listen to your elders, you can watch movies, you can go to birthday classes. But what couple hasn't come home from the hospital with that little child in panic and said, listen, no one has prepared us for this. We're just not ready, right? The birth of a child. The birth of a child is a crossing over of a threshold. Things are never the same again. Am I right? Or am I making this up?
No.
That's right? You're like stepping over, like it's never the same. Your life is never the same as it was before. The birth of a Messiah is stepping over a threshold. The world, the church, steps over a threshold. The birth of a Messiah invites us to live into the role of parent long enough to become children. What we're supposed to do with all this Christmas stuff, this birth of a child stuff, this Christmas Eve stuff, is we're supposed to live and feel in the joy and the love of that night. Really? You're supposed to be there with Mary and Joseph. And you're supposed to see that little baby. And you're supposed to grab it, right? Get this out, right? And just cuddle it up. Don't you want to do that? No, it's Jesus, right? It's not. It's okay. It's a little baby. You're supposed to hold that baby. You're supposed to feel that cuddly baby in your arms. And you're supposed to embrace the moment. And just like every new parent, you have made a commitment when you embrace this child. There's no going back. There's no taking them back. Is there? The hospital won't take them even if you're crying, right? There's no... You're making a commitment that night. You're supposed to wake up tomorrow and you're supposed to say, how do I do this? What I'm saying is, tonight you've crossed the threshold of Christianity. You're supposed to hold this Messiah, this new child, and love it. Because that's what you do with babies. But next week, when we see Jesus again, they're going to be 12 years old. So tomorrow night, you're going to wake up and you're going to be like, what am I supposed to do with this Christianity? What is it like? What does it mean? Right? Do it. And so if this is your first night being a Christian, I say welcome. Welcome. It's an awesome journey you're on, right? Okay. Sometimes I get asked, how do I do this thing? How do I become a Christian? Or I want to become a Christian, what should I do? Or I've just become a Christian, what do you advise me to do? And I say, what do you know about the stories? You got to read this, you got to know the stories, because that's what it is, right? We got to know our history. So they say, where's the manual? I say, well, the manual, let's start with the Gospels. You got to know your stories, right? But I never say read John. Ever. First, John is not a beginner text. John is a 400 level text. Am I right?
Amen.
Right? John is this deep, mysterious, poetic, theological deal, right? This is not, once there was a God, right? Right? How does John begin? How does John begin? John begins, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Jesus. Huh? Yeah. Right? He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through Him, and without Him, not anything was made. In Him was life, and the light was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Right? This does not start like a story. This is high-level stuff. I'm glad that we have it tonight, but it's an odd thing to read on the first night of being a Christian, right? We're going to celebrate this first night of the birth of the Messiah. Rather, I would say to a new Christian or someone who wanted to know more about their story, go to Luke, right? I'd say go to Luke. Because Luke starts this way. Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile a narrative of things that have been accomplished among us, just as they were delivered to us by those from the beginning who were eyewitnesses, it seems good to me, having followed all things closely, to write an orderly account for you. Right? Then he goes on, in the days of Herod, kings of Judah, blah, 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 blah. Right? So it's a story. Right? It's the beginning. Now, we have a distinguished author among us. I don't know if you know, but the Reverend Chuck Peake is well known in literary circles. And Chuck, am I right when I say the opening line of a book is really important, right? I mean, they say there's been some really great opening lines, right? Can you think of one? Your favorite opening line of a book?
Once upon a time.
Okay, a fairy tale, yeah. The best of times, it was the worst of times. The Tale of Two Cities, yeah?
Yeah.
Say what?
Marley was dead to begin with.
I mean, that makes you want to dig right in, doesn't it? Absolutely. Marley was dead to begin with. The best of times, the worst of times. Here's a couple more. This one is, the letter that would change everything arrived on a Tuesday. Right? That makes you want to, I wonder what that letter said. Right? How about this one? The night Max wore his wolf suit and made mischief of one kind to another, his mother called him Wild Thing. And Max said, I'll eat you up. So she sent him to bed without eating anything. Right? The first line of a book is really important. And this opening line of John is so beautiful, so poetic, so important. It's telling us something about God, right? See, the first century was a time of working out what the baby meant. So we had the baby, and then we had the young child, and then we had the grown man, and then we had the ministry, and then we had the death, and then we had the resurrection, and the post-resurrection appearances, and we've only gone 30 years into the first century, right? Well, John's been written to like 90, 80, 90, depending on which scholar you're talking about, right? Luke is a little earlier, Matthew's a little earlier, Mark's probably a little earlier. 20, 30, 40 years they're working this out. 50 years they're working. What does it mean? And by the time they get to John, John is making this actually an amazing, bold theological claim. Right? Well, listen to what John is saying. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were. So he's talking about Jesus, right? The Logos. And all of John then is working out this idea of who Jesus was. See? And who was Jesus then? Both man and God. So by the time we get to John, right, we've already worked it out. Jesus, man, and God. So what happens to the community of John? The people who know the book, who study the book of John. They're kicked out of the synagogue. Why? Because you can only have one God, right? Monotheistic, yeah. Right? So they worked it out. You know what it means? We're to say there's two. And they go, what? Sorry, you're not in anymore. You're out. So by the time we get to John, they've crossed the threshold. No longer Jewish Christ followers, but Christians. Right? There's no going back. It's only forward. Right? Now, as time goes on, the Christian church starts to fill in some of its own story. Right? So it has to go back and sort of figure out what it all meant and how it all happened. And that's how we get Christmas. So it's not till the 4th century we get Christmas. Did you know that? Not till the 4th century do they decide, okay, let's celebrate it that day. And they picked an interesting day. It's the winter solstice, right? It's the shortest day of the year. Why? Because Jesus is the light. What do you want on the shortest day of the year? Light. Yeah? That's why we have Christmas lights, isn't it? Light. Right? Jesus comes in the shortest day of the year. Darkness brings light, right? So, 4th century, we're working it out. We're filling in our backstory. And my problem with Christmas, you guys, is that I've kind of lost the spirit because I'll tell you why. It's so complicated. I've heard so many people say this week, I just don't have it this year. Is that your story? Anybody here? I just don't have it this year. Murder? Yeah, right? It just kind of stuck up on me. I just couldn't get into it, right? I think it's because of this. Right? I think we put too much on Christmas. I think we ask too much of this day. I was telling the kids earlier, this is where my sermon blew up, so be careful. Don't talk about it. Don't jump in. But I said, what do you do on your birthday? What do you get on your birthday?
Presents.
Presents. Don't. I'm kidding. Presents you get on your birthday. What do you do at Thanksgiving?
Family.
And
Food.
Food and family. What do you do at Easter? Go to
Church.
Eggs. Too much communion wine.
So look, presents, church, family, food. We try to cram it all in on Christmas. That's my point, right? This small, simple celebration can't bear the weight of everything we try to give it. So no wonder it's hard. I'm saying let's just cut off. Let's go back to the essentials of what Christmas is. What are those? Right? What are those? Well, Jesus wasn't born by himself. Who was he with? Mary, Joseph, right? He was born into a family. God was born into a family. So one of the essentials, I think we could say, is that we're not meant to be alone. Right? We're not meant to be alone. Will you just reach over and grab the hand of somebody next to you? Give it a squeeze, right? Look, we're a community. We're a family. You're not meant to be alone. That's one of the essentials. What else is Christmas? What was great about it? It was joyful. It was so joyful. We're not meant to be unhappy. We spend so much of our lives being unhappy. Isn't that a waste? Come on. We're meant to be joyful. That's the essential. Right? What else about Christmas? We give gifts. We give, even if we don't, even sometimes we go into debt. I'm not recommending it. I'm just saying, we give generously. We're not meant to be selfish. We're not meant to be alone, right? We're not meant to be unhappy, and we're not meant to be selfish. And lastly, just imagine that night in the barn, that manger. What feeling comes over you when you see that? If you imagine yourself in that place, for me, it's peace, isn't it? We're not supposed to be in strife all the time and arguing and resentful. We're just not. The essentials of Christmas are community, family, right? Joy, right? Generosity, and peace. That doesn't seem to be too much to put on one holiday. We can do that. Let's let everything else go, all right? The thing about living in Christ, being a Christian, is there is a name, of course. Begin with the stories. Begin with the stories, right? And I don't care if you're a brand new Christian or if you're just back to the faith or you're just examining it in a new way. You know, maybe tonight is the night when you cross the threshold in a new way, to a new relationship with God, right? Look, you're going to heaven. Like, I believe that totally, right? You're all baptized, going to heaven. I'm all for that. But maybe you want more. Cross over that threshold tonight. I'm saying, read the stories. You got to read the stories and believe the theological claims they contain. That Jesus was God. And then ask yourself what that means. Cross that threshold. Because why? Because your life will change. Your life will change. It will. You will no longer be welcome in your old life. You'll get kicked out of your own synagogue. You're never going to be welcome again in your old life if you cross the threshold. Anyway. And I'm saying you'll have to abandon yourself to God's promises. Live for the essentials of family, joy, generosity, humility, and peace. The bad news is there's no going back, you guys, once you do it. The good news is the way forward is with God. God is with you. And it's wonderful.